Today, we are undertaking a deep dive into a file that is, I have to say, completely counterintuitive to me.
Hmm.
Our source stack is just filled with these analyses arguing that one of the most beloved, seemingly innocent classics of American literature is actually a profound threat to the modern status quo.
It sounds kind of crazy when you put it like that.
It does. We are talking about Louisa May Alcott's Little Women.
It just sounds like a literary anomaly, doesn't it? A story published in 1868. It's got four sisters in the Civil War era Massachusetts. They're wearing bonnets and reading Dickens.
Right.
Why on earth are contemporary school boards and cultural critics even devoting time to labeling this book subversive? It should just be cozy nostalgia.
It should be.
But the sources are treating this material not as, like, quaint historical fiction, but as something actively politically dangerous.
That's the mission right there. I mean, what is this dangerous literary weapon, as one of our sources calls it, that's hiding inside a story usually just relegated to the classics for girls shelf?
Yeah.
What makes it so relevant in 2025?
The one-sentence hook that I think defines this entire deep dive is precisely this. Little Women is a classic that parents and school boards are still trying to ban today.
Still,
because it fundamentally teaches girls one terrifying lesson. You don't have to choose between a fulfilling love life and an ambitious, independent career.
you can demand both.
You can and you should demand both.
Wow, that completely reframes the narrative we usually receive about this book. I mean, when we think of books facing challenges and bans today, they usually tackle, very explicit modern topics.
Sure. Like race, gender identity, critical theory.
Exactly. So to see a book written 157 years ago still generating this kind of cultural heat and still being actively removed from school curricula it's just astonishing.
It confirms the central thesis of our sources, which is that the revolutionary potential of this story remains potent. It's not old news.
Not at all.
The critique argues that the book undermines the expected path for young women, even today. It validates female ambition not as some temporary phase before marriage, but as a central component of a life well lived.
So what we're really looking at is a progressive manifesto, a menace to the traditional status quo, cleverly disguised in this comforting veneer of a Victorian family saga.
That's a perfect way to put it.
Okay, let's unpack this. How did this story become such a cultural time bomb? I think we have to start at the foundation, right? We need to set the scene for the March family and the circumstances of its creation.
Absolutely. And the setting is crucial. It's Concord, Massachusetts, specifically the period around, say, 1862 through 1868, so shortly after the height of the Civil War.
So it's not a time of settled peace.
Not at all. It was a period of tremendous national transformation, social upheaval, and deep, deep economic uncertainty. The country was grieving this immense loss, and family structures had been radically altered by the conflict.
And the general premise centers on the March family. They are dealing with what the sources call genteel poverty. And I want to spend a moment on that phrase because it's not just about being poor, is it? It implies a constant psychological struggle.
It's everything. Genteel poverty means you have the education, you have the manners, the intellectual and social connections that suggest you should be comfortable, but you lack the basic material means.
So it's a constant performance.
It's a pervasive, crippling anxiety about money set against this backdrop of high ideals.
Yeah.
You are perpetually trying to maintain appearances like, hosting a tea party with only 2 saucers while secretly terrified of creditors showing up at the door.
And their poverty is made even worse by the absence of Mr. March. He's serving as a Civil War chaplain. But while his physical absence is central, our sources highlight a deeper truth, and this is drawn from Alcott's own life. Mr. March's presence, even when he was home, often mirrored an emotional or financial absence.
He's the prototype of the brilliant but impractical dreamer, relying entirely on the labor of the women around him. And that immediately establishes the Marches as a functionally matriarchal family. They're forced to be resourceful purely out of necessity.
And that's where we meet the central figures who drive this revolution, starting with Marmee, Mrs. March. She's the exhausted but, incredibly strong matriarch holding everything together while projecting this image of serene resilience.
And then you have the 4 very distinct sisters. Meg, the eldest, who is drawn toward that traditional domestic life. She desires beautiful things, comfort, the security of a good marriage. But then she later struggles with the realities of that choice.
Big time. Then there's Jo, the rebellious, awkward, intensely ambitious writer. She's the clear engine of the novel's revolutionary spirit, rejecting feminine norms and just dreaming of a life of splashy, almost masculine-coded adventure.
And Beth, the gentle musician and the family anchor. Her quiet kindness really forms the novel's moral center. And her eventual fate provides the deepest emotional core, which is dealt with in this unflinchingly honest way that it was so rare for the time.
And finally, Amy, the youngest. She's focused on art, culture, social status, refinement, and she's often misread as just being shallow.
Very often. But the analysis suggests Alcott saw her ambition for grace and status as a legitimate, equally valid goal for a woman of that era. It was another path.
So what Alcott achieved here was, it was revolutionary literary realism. She proved that the narrative texture of ordinary daily life, the minutiae of chores, the domestic arguments, the simple joys, could sustain deep, compelling interest.
Yeah, she was truth-telling about the domestic existence of middle-class women, which was a territory previously ignored by serious literature. That stuff was usually all about grand adventure or these explicit morality tales.
And that profound level of honesty about the domestic sphere is exactly what makes the specific plot points, which I think we have to get into now, so radically charged.
Okay, let's do it.
So this is where it gets really interesting. We're diving into the major spoiler-laden events that established the novel's lasting radical reputation.
We have to begin with the legendary manuscript burning. I mean, this moment is pure devastation. Amy, in a fit of jealousy after a quarrel, destroys Jo's entire manuscript.
And this was her life's work up to that point.
Everything. A novel she had painstakingly created, and which, crucially, she hoped would earn them desperately needed money.
So the sources argue that treating this literary destruction as such a major catastrophe was one of the novel's first radical acts. Because in 1868, a woman's writing was often seen as just a minor hobby, right?
Yeah.
A scribble to occupy her time.
Exactly. But Alcott treated Jo's manuscript as genuine, valuable work. It was a creative portfolio, a financial asset, and, a piece of her soul.
By making the destruction of the manuscript a betrayal so immense that Jo nearly drowns Amy in retribution.
I mean, she falls through the ice, and Jo hesitates.
Right. By doing that, Alcott validates the idea that Jo's intellectual and creative pursuit was real work, deserving of respect equal to any man's labor. The consequences of that destruction, the loss of potential income, the emotional trauma, are treated with the appropriate catastrophic seriousness.
Absolutely. And then we move to what you could call the ultimate sacrifice. Jo sells her beautiful long hair for $25.
And this is to fund Marmee's urgent trip to Washington to care for their dying father.
This is a visually shocking, deeply symbolic moment of female rebellion and self-definition. In 19th century society, a woman's long hair was the quintessential marker of her femininity.
And her beauty, her marriageability.
It was a critical economic asset in the marriage market. It really was.
So by cutting and selling it, Jo is literally selling her conventional female identity and her immediate social value just to keep the family afloat. She is sacrificing the ornament of the wife for the functionality of the breadwinner.
It's an act of profound self-definition as the family's functional engine, and it overrides the romantic expectation of being an ornament. The sources emphasize that this moment of devastation, Jo mourning her severed hair, connects directly to the modern experience of economic anxiety.
Right. It's the timeless struggle. I mean, how many listeners today have sold something precious or sacrificed their time, their health, their security, just to help their family weather a financial storm?
It's so relatable.
Alcott took that painful reality and gave it this potent, unforgettable symbol.
And this brings us to the plot point that caused the most outrage at the time. The non-ending, or, the rejection of the perfect match.
Right.
When the handsome, wealthy, and devoted Laurie proposes, Jo firmly rejects him. She says, "I can't love you as you want me to. We don't suit each other."
And this choice was seismic. It challenged the fundamental literary and social expectation that a woman's life narrative must culminate in a suitable marriage, especially when the alternative was poverty.
You're supposed to take the good offer.
Of course, Jo choosing her personal ambition and her uncompromising sense of self over the easy, secure path was a radical political act hidden inside a romance novel.
She chooses not to settle simply because Laurie fulfills the societal checklist. She requires a genuine intellectual partner, not just a romantic resolution.
And while Jo does eventually marry Professor Bear, the sources are clear. This relationship is predicated on intellectual connection, a shared love of literature and ideas, and mutual respect. It's a partnership she chooses on her own terms, not out of desperation.
Right.
But wait, okay, so if Joe's choice was so radically independent, why did Alcott ultimately marry her off to Professor Bear at all? Doesn't that, on some level, compromise the message of female independence? Did she just fold under the commercial pressure?
That is the eternal debate, and it's one the sources explore deeply. Alcott herself resisted the marriage plot. She famously said she would leave Joe a literary spinster.
Which would have been even more revolutionary.
Oh, completely.
Yeah.
But she felt immense pressure from her publisher and, more importantly, from her massive, demanding female readership. They wrote letters, they demanded it. She needed to give the audience a resolution.
So she compromised.
Well, yes and no. The critical analysis is that she compromised only on the fact of marriage, not the form of it. Think about Bear. He's older, he's poor, he's awkward, and he's fundamentally uninterested in status.
The polar opposite of Laurie.
Exactly. Marrying Bear allowed Jo to maintain her independent career and her intellectual life. It made the marriage itself an unconventional declaration of independence rather than a surrender to domesticity. It was kind of the least traditional marriage she could invent while still delivering a quote-unquote happy ending.
That makes sense. To truly grasp why these plot points resonated with such force, we need to dive into the human story. I mean, what drove Alcott to write a book she initially found utterly tedious and dismissed in her own journal as moral pap?
It wasn't artistic inspiration, that's for sure. It was stark, paralyzing financial desperation in 1868. Alcott was the sole lifeline for her entire family.
Her father was incapable of providing.
Completely. They owed money constantly to creditors, grocers, landlords.
Oh.
Her sister Anna's husband had deserted the family, which increased the financial burden, and their home in Concord was facing foreclosure.
So she wasn't just, indulging a creative impulse. She was scrambling for an immediate commercial payout just to stave off destitution.
The sources detail her punishing life before the book's success. She was the family's primary breadwinner. She'd work these grueling hours as a seamstress, often getting her hands permanently stained from the piecework she did late into the night.
And a governess, a Civil War nurse.
All of it. The sources suggest she had already sacrificed her own romantic prospects entirely for the family's survival, much like Jo initially believed she had to.
Which is the ultimate irony, right? The blueprint for female liberation was written by a woman who felt deeply trapped by economic necessity and familial duty.
And this leads us to the critical context. The specter of her father, Bronson Alcott, who served as the direct, if, sanitized prototype for the impractical Mr. March.
Bronson Alcott, a man characterized in the sources as a brilliant transcendentalist philosopher, but an utterly useless provider. Let's get into his most famous and frankly absurd financial scheme. Fruitlands.
Ooh, Fruitlands.
Yeah.
It was a vegetarian utopian commune Bronson established in the Massachusetts countryside. The aim was spiritual and intellectual purity. The disastrous reality was that the family nearly starved because Bronson, believing that farming was beneath serious philosophical contemplation, refused to actually work the land.
The absurdity is stunning. They ate only vegetables, no meat, no animal products, not even root vegetables like potatoes.
Because they grew down into the earth, which was considered too base.
And they wore linen in a Massachusetts winter because wool was deemed immoral.
After 7 months, the family was suffering from severe malnutrition and exposure. The women, Louisa and her mother, had to be rescued by merciful neighbors who brought food and clothing. This cycle of idealistic failure and subsequent crippling debt defined Louisa's childhood.
It forced the family to move 17 times just to evade creditors.
17 times.
And if you are a listener navigating modern economic uncertainty, maybe dealing with a partner chasing a financially questionable ideal while you manage the logistics of survival, you know exactly the psychological burden Louisa endured.
That's why the depiction of genteel poverty in Little Women feels so piercingly real. It was her lived trauma.
And we have to contrast this with Alcott's hidden life. Before she was known for Little Women, she was a highly successful, albeit anonymous, writer of dark thrillers.
Yeah, these sensational short stories published in the pulp magazines of the era.
And these were stories filled with passion, revenge, melodrama, and drug use, often involving strong, violent female characters.
The conflict here is immense. The highly profitable, sensational pulp writer had to transition to writing what she deemed wholesome fare for girls just to pay the bills.
That internal conflict between her true artistic desires, the dark thrillers, and commercial necessity, the domestic children's novel, is perfectly mirrored in Jo March's own struggle.
Absolutely. Between writing morally sound, elevated fiction versus churning out sensational, profitable tales under pseudonyms. This is the same battle.
And the ending of Alcott's life is genuinely bittersweet. Despite the book's monumental success, she died thinking she'd failed as a writer.
She never reconciled herself to being known primarily for what she considered her lesser work, the moral pap.
Yet the financial liberation she achieved was total. I mean, the book earned her $8,500 in the first year.
Which is equivalent to over $200,000 today. It provided the security she'd craved her entire life. It allowed her to pay off the family debts, buy a proper home, and support her family members until her death.
So the book she thought was tedious was, quite literally, her family's financial salvation.
It was everything.
To fully understand the revolutionary impact of the March Sisters story, we have to contextualize it. What was the social climate in 1868 that made this seemingly small story so explosive?
As we mentioned, America was reeling from the Civil War. The conflict fundamentally destabilized the patriarchal family structure. With vast numbers of men killed, disabled, or just absent, women were forced to step into roles traditionally reserved for men.
Running businesses, managing farms, handling finances.
Working outside the home. The war accelerated a fundamental, irreversible questioning of traditional gender roles.
The sources highlight the parallel to 2025 America. I mean, we're also experiencing a period of intense social and economic flux-shifting remote work expectations, rising costs, general uncertainty. It's forcing families to redefine what normal structure even looks like.
Right. The themes of a forced matriarchy and redefined roles resonate so powerfully.
And Alcott was writing from Concord, the intellectual epicenter of transcendentalism. So on the one hand, the air was thick with intellectual liberation.
Ralph Waldo Emerson was next door. Henry David Thoreau taught the girls to ice skate. They were discussing abolition, spiritual growth, and women's rights daily.
But as we established, beneath that stimulating atmosphere lay constant, crippling material poverty. Alcott's life was defined by this tension between the highest ideals of intellectual freedom and the crushing reality of financial obligation.
And that tension is the core dramatic fuel for the March family.
This dichotomy is embodied by the March family structure. Mr. March's absence, whether from war or just from practicality, forces Marmee to embody the exhausted strength of a modern mother managing a massive logistical burden alone.
She is the administrative, financial, and emotional head of the household.
And the childhood escapes we see in the book, the elaborate theatrical productions, they weren't just innocent fun, were they?
No, our sources describe them as a necessary emotional release. They were transforming poverty and uncertainty into imaginative possibility. They were literally dreaming of other lives, other ways to be.
And that leads to why the timing was so perfect.
Ah.
Post-war America craved stories of stability, yet the reality was that traditional roles were being questioned.
So Little Women served as a literary Trojan horse. It provided the comforting, domestic, moral stories the era demanded on the surface.
While smuggling in these radical ideas about female economic autonomy, ambition, and intellectual choice right beneath the surface.
Exactly.
That concept, the Trojan horse of radical ideas, brings us to the heart of this deep dive. If this book is a weapon, what fundamental, enduring questions is it asking? Because it's clearly not just a book about romance.
No, it's about figuring out how to live a full, self-directed life.
So the central theme, then, is this integration of self and family.
Right. The novel breaks the prevailing social contract that required women to subsume their identity, their ambition, their desires entirely into the family unit. Little Women insists that women can be fiercely ambitious, creatively fulfilled, and independent while simultaneously valuing family bonds and relationships.
This is a vision of integration, not compromise or necessary sacrifice. And this unwavering insistence that women don't have to choose between their career and their home is precisely the revolutionary vision that traditional values advocates find threatening today.
It fundamentally refutes the idea that a woman's identity must be completely subordinate to others.
This is layered upon an incredibly honest portrayal of poverty. The March family's genteel poverty is presented not as some charming backdrop, but as a real challenge requiring agonizing practical solutions.
When Jo sells her hair, or when Meg meticulously makes her own wedding dress, these moments underscore that financial precarity fundamentally shapes choices. It limits options, and it imposes genuine suffering.
The psychological impact of keeping up appearances while struggling to pay bills is just palpable throughout the entire narrative.
And Alcott, having lived through the cycle of debt and shame, refused to romanticize that economic reality.
Then there is the profoundly modern theme of artistic integrity versus commerce.
Yes. Joe's struggle writing sensational pseudonymous stories for quick cash before moving to more serious personal fiction, Alcott's own tension between popular success, which was necessary for survival, and the experimental or intellectual writing she truly valued.
It's the 19th century version of an artist deciding whether to produce complex, challenging art or, churn out quick, high-volume content like simple TikTok videos just to pay the rent.
That tension between audience demands and artistic purity is captured perfectly in Joe's early career decisions. It makes it extremely relevant to today's creator economy struggles.
And finally, the theme of redefining domesticity, which we see primarily through Meg. Meg chooses the traditional path of marriage and domesticity, but Alcott shows the unvarnished reality of it.
She struggles with exhaustion, she resents her husband John's absences, and she actively mourns the loss of her personal freedom and her girlhood luxury.
That revolutionary honesty just cuts through the idealized version of marriage that dominated 19th century literature. It's an admission that even a loving, wanted marriage does not equate to automatic, endless fulfillment.
No, it involves mundane exhaustion, financial stress, and internal resentment. That transparency about domestic life acts like the modern social media versus reality gap. It's so honest.
So let's talk about the characters themselves. Alcott's characters were revolutionary because they were complex and profoundly flawed.
Absolutely. Unlike the stiff, perfect role models of didactic children's books that came before her work, the March sisters argued they were jealous, they made serious mistakes, and they grew through failure. They felt real because Alcott based them directly on the chaos, conflict, and love of her own family life.
Starting with Jo March, the anti-heroine who inspired millions. She voices the core existential ambition of the novel when she declares, "I want to do something splendid, something heroic or wonderful that won't be forgotten after I'm dead."
And that statement transcends merely wanting a nice house or a good husband. It's the voice of every woman who fears that settling for conventional domesticity will kill the internal ambitious fire inside her.
Her ambition is fundamentally intellectual and creative.
Yes, it's about rejecting the physical and emotional confines of the domestic sphere.
And the impact of Jo is staggeringly broad. I mean, Supreme Court Justice Elena Kagan cites her ambition as formative. The writer Roxane Gay credits her influence. Our sources even point out that politically disparate figures like Ivanka Trump and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez both cite Jo's drive and independence as influential.
And that contrast is essential. It proves that Jo's message of self-determination is universal. Whether a young woman interprets that ambition as aspiring to the highest echelons of corporate or political power, like Trump, or challenging established power structures through activism in government, like Ocasio-Cortez.
Jo provides the blueprint for demanding fulfillment beyond tradition.
She does.
Then there's Amy March, often the most controversial sister. She is frequently maligned for her social climbing, her vanity, and her focus on appearances.
So often. But Alcott defended Amy fiercely, and modern critiques often support this. Alcott insisted that Amy's ambition for beauty, culture, status, and refinement were legitimate, complex goals. Not every woman is destined to be a writer.
Right, some desire grace, social influence, and material comfort, and that is not necessarily shallowness.
Exactly. And Amy's career arc is fascinatingly modern in its realism. She attempts to become a great fine artist, but eventually she recognizes she will only be a competent one.
So she abandons the dream of being the primary creative force, but finds fulfillment supporting other artists, ultimately through her marriage to Laurie and her patronage.
This mirrors the modern creator economy. Fulfillment isn't limited to being the star creator. It can also be found in supportive, administrative, or patronage roles that keep the arts alive. Her choice is one of realistic, nuanced fulfillment, rather than settling for mediocrity in a field where she couldn't excel.
And Marmee March, the family matriarch, becomes the exhausted pillar, who perhaps resonates most deeply with the modern working parent.
Marmee embodies the psychological complexity of a mother trying to project perfect moral strength while privately struggling. She admits to Jo, for example, that she battles a terrible temper every single day.
She reflects every modern parent managing household chaos and logistical burdens, often alone, due to the father's absence, whether that's a physical absence or the more insidious emotional disconnection that leaves one person managing the entire mental load.
It's so true. And finally, Beth March, the unflinching tragedy. Her death from scarlet fever is the novel's devastating emotional anchor.
And Alcott refused to romanticize this loss. She provides a raw, unhealed grief.
This scene is rooted in Alcott's reality. She based the death directly on the passing of her beloved sister, Elizabeth, who died young. That personal connection makes the dialogue so immediate and wrenching.
When Beth whispers to Joe, "I should be homesick for you, even in heaven."
It's just the honesty about profound existential loss connects so viscerally with modern readers navigating grief and fragility.
For our listeners who love the craft of writing, let's look at how Alcott managed to achieve this revolutionary impact through her style. I mean, how did she take ordinary domestic life and make it so emotionally compelling?
Well, she pioneered realism through the use of naturalistic dialogue, what one source calls the sparkle of dialogue. Before Alcott, children's literature, especially literature aimed at girls, was often highly didactic.
So characters spoke formally to deliver moral lessons or plot exposition?
Pretty much. But Alcott broke that mold. She captured how families actually speak. The teasing, the inside jokes, the use of affectionate, slightly slangy nicknames like Marmee, Teddy, Little Pickle.
And the exclamations like, "Christopher Columbus."
Yes, it felt lived in and revolutionary. It created an immediate emotional intimacy that transcended class and geography. By hearing the sisters argue and tease and whisper secrets, the reader felt like a privileged observer of authentic life, not a student in a morality lesson.
And that attention to natural speech became a cornerstone of modern realism.
And she essentially established female friendship as a central, legitimate narrative force. The sisters' bonds were sources of strength and central to their identity, not merely a backdrop to rivalry for male attention.
Which was so common at the time.
In the literary landscape of the 19th century, women were often pitted against each other, rivals for the same man or the same status. Little Women established that women's mutual support, their shared dreams, and collective coping mechanisms could be the very axis of the story.
And that influenced countless subsequent works about female relationships. I mean, from Sex and the City to modern television dramas.
Definitely. And the simple use of details, the texture of daily life, that became her narrative goldmine. She understood that the big stories are hidden in the small moments.
The meticulously planned, homemade Christmas gifts, the cozy evening conversations by the fire, the elaborate attic plays.
This focus on domestic minutiae transformed the genre. Alcott demonstrated that these intimate domestic details, the very stuff of ordinary life, were worthy of serious narrative consideration. This subtle shift paved the way for modern family narratives.
Shifting the focus from grand external adventures to profound internal and relational experiences.
In a very real sense, she was the original pioneer of the type of detailed, emotional family content we see in modern vlogs and reality TV.
That's a great point. Let's turn now to the drama of reception, how the book was viewed when it was published versus how it's viewed today, because the controversy has proven to be cyclical.
The book was an immediate, stunning sensation upon publication in 1868. The first edition sold out within weeks. It was a commercial and critical phenomenon.
And girls wrote Alcott desperate fan letters.
That he did. And critically, many noted that they finally recognized their own family struggles with genteel poverty reflected in print, and they felt validated and brave instead of ashamed.
That commercial success and personal resonance validated Alcott's accidental achievement. The book was doing deep psychological and social work beyond just entertainment.
However, the immediate success was followed by a ferocious fan backlash.
Right, and this was largely focused on the ultimate destination of Jo March.
Readers wrote angry letters demanding Alcott change the ending, threatening to burn copies of the book because Jo rejected Laurie.
And parents and religious leaders were actively worried that their daughters would follow Jo's selfish example, the pursuit of personal ambition, and reject suitable marriages, disrupting the necessary social order.
The public understood the radical potential of Jo's choice instantly. It was a clear, palpable threat to the structures invested in female domestic subservience. Alcott had accidentally created a genuine role model for ambition, and the backlash was the result of cultural fear.
But despite the ongoing controversy in the U.S., the novel achieved massive global acceptance.
It did. The novel became a phenomenon abroad. It sparked the Little Women boom in 1970s Japan, where women were embracing Jo's fierce independence during a period of their own rapid modernization.
And it also profoundly influenced women's education movements in places like India.
Demonstrating that its universal themes of aspiration, family, and financial survival really transcended specific cultural boundaries.
And bringing us back to the present, the continuing controversy in 2025, the book is still actively challenged and targeted today.
Absolutely. Our sources confirm it is currently being challenged in school districts like Highlands County in Florida for explicit reasons, including promoting rebellion against parental authority.
Wow.
And it appears regularly on conservative family blogs' lists of books that undermine traditional values because it prioritizes individual female fulfillment over the collective family sacrifice.
And the debates around the 2019 Greta Gerwig film adaptation, where critics complained of feminist revisionism.
That proves that the same fundamental fight over female creative independence still exists today.
Because Gerwig's adaptation just highlighted the radical themes that were already there.
Exactly. They were already embedded in the text Joe's ambition, Meg's domestic struggles, Amy's class consciousness. Every adaptation forces a new generation to confront the novel's foundational radicalism, proving the conflict never truly went away.
So how does this seemingly old-fashioned story maintain this massive cultural relevance and continue to feel so modern? Let's talk about its influence.
Little Women is fundamental to the literary DNA of modern storytelling. It established the template for young adult literature. It proved that books addressing adolescent concerns about self-discovery, challenging circumstances, and complex family relationships could achieve both massive commercial success and profound cultural impact.
We see Alcott's influence everywhere. Writers of classics like Anne of Green Gables and modern hits like The Hunger Games acknowledge her blueprint.
For example, it established that a young woman thrust into the role of primary provider, dealing with financial strain, moral complexity, and forced maturity, like a Katniss Everdeen, can serve as a compelling, necessary narrative center.
So Alcott legitimized the teenage girl struggling against economic necessity as a heroic archetype.
She did, and its themes are constantly recycled in modern references across media. Each new film or TV adaptation allows new generations to emphasize different aspects.
The 1933 Katharine Hepburn version emphasized Joe's eccentric energy.
The 1994 Winona Ryder version highlighted the romantic elements.
And the 2019 Gerwig version stressed the commercial reality of Alcott's life and Joe's career ambitions.
The enduring power of the novel lies in this flexibility. Whether Joe's ambition resonates with contemporary career women fighting for equal pay, or the sisterly bonds offer a necessary refuge from harsh public discourse and social media pressures.
The novel's core honesty ensures its persistent relevance. It functions as a flexible mirror for female aspiration and anxiety across centuries.
That's it, exactly.
As we wrap up this deep dive, let's turn to our personal reflections. What struck me the most is the powerful, almost accidental genius of Alcott. She achieved a revolutionary impact through seeming conservatism, creating that Trojan horse for radical ideas that could bypass the era's censorship.
That subtle approach was key to its success. She wrapped the radical message of female autonomy, economic independence, and intellectual fulfillment in the palatable, comforting guise of a heartwarming family story.
So it reached millions of young women who would have instantly rejected more overt feminist political tracks of the time.
Without a doubt.
And what should listeners pay attention to if they read or reread the book today? What specific details hit differently once you know the context of Alcott's life?
I would say focus intensely on the moments of financial reality. The specific cost of Joe selling her hair, the description of Meg trying to manage the household budget after marriage, the constant anxiety over appearances.
There's a psychological honesty about marriage.
Particularly Meg's confession of exhaustion and resentment. Understanding Alcott's desperately poor personal life makes Joe's fierce ambition hit differently. It wasn't just a choice. It was an urgent matter of survival, dignity, and sanity.
So who would genuinely enjoy this book today, beyond those who read it as children?
Anyone navigating economic uncertainty, dealing with career ambition, struggling with creative monetization, or trying to reconcile popular success with artistic integrity? If you are struggling to define your identity outside of traditional family expectations, this book is written for you.
And who fundamentally wouldn't enjoy it, even today?
Those who believe that individual fulfillment should always be subordinate to traditional, rigid family structure, and that a woman's greatest achievement lies in self-sacrifice for the domestic good. This book remains a potent, enduring threat to that worldview.
Which is why it continues to face challenges in 2025.
It is.
That is a powerful conclusion. Alcott unintentionally handed millions of girls a weapon disguised as a bedtime story. Every time a woman chooses her dreams, refuses to settle, or demands intellectual and economic parity, she is channeling Joe March.
That is the lasting, revolutionary legacy of Little Women.
And that enduring threat brings us to our final provocative thought for the listener.
Considering the constant challenges to the book today, if Louisa May Alcott was writing Little Women in 2025, navigating social media perfection, the gig economy, and the extreme pressure to be both a perfect parent and an ambitious professional cubby, What modern traditional value would Jo March most fiercely reject or rebel against in her pursuit of a splendid life?
Something for you to mull over until our next session. Thank you for joining us for this deep dive into the source material you shared. We look forward to exploring what knowledge you bring to the table next time.